It said recording in progress, and this month is a holiday weekend, and normally we don't. The Learning Tree Book Club doesn't read, but Vickie and I decided that we would go ahead and read, and we're both founding members of the Learning Tree Book Club, and my name is Meredith McGee, and I'm going to be reading Sister Souljah's book, Midnight, a novel that I've been reading. And what are you reading today, Vickie?
I'm going back to my Grisham.
Okay. Well, you want to start? I guess we could do 10 minutes apiece.
Oh, okay then. All right. I'm gonna pick back up about where I left off from. So let me see. The drive from Central. Oh, am I mute? Oh.
No, you are. You reading, Vickie?
No, are we starting yet? Okay. John Grisham, Sycamore Row. Picking up from the last one. The Last Will and Testament of Henry Seth Hubbard. Yes?
Oh, I ain't say nothing.
Okay, I was saying. The Last Will and Testament of Henry Seth Hubbard. Seth Hubbard, being 71 years old, of good mind, but decaying body, hereby of sound. See, somebody tried to call me. Well, anyway, Seth Hubbard, being 71 years old and of good mind, but decaying body, do hereby mark this my last will and testament. Number one, I am a resident of the state of Mississippi. My legal address is 4498 Simpson Road in Palmyra, Ford County. I recognize previous wills signed by myself, decade or so old. September 7th, 1987, and was prepared by Mr. Louis McGee of the Russian Lombard firm in Tupelo, Mississippi. The last will specifically renounced that I signed March of 1985, renounced that this will and testament let's see, I can't even talk. This is intended to be a holographic will with everybody written by me and in my handwriting, and no help from anyone has been given. It is a signal dedicated by me, prepared alone in my office this day, October 1st, 1988. I am of clear mind, have full testamentary capacity. No one is exiting and attempting to exit influence over me. I appoint as executor of my estate, Russell Ambar, 762 Amber Street in Temple, Mississippi. Mr. Ambar was the vice president of my holding company and workshop, knowing that I was the mass habitant, and I direct my Ambar to retain my services of Mr. Jake Brigance, attorney at law in Clanton, Mississippi, to provide necessary representation at my directive. No one in law and no one in the Ford County touch my estate, earn a penny of this probate. I have 2 children, Herschel Hubbard and Ramona Hubbard Defoe, and they have 2 children. I don't know how many children, because I have not been in any kind of contact with in some time. Someone specifically excluded of me my children. Let me see. Someone has excluded both of my children and all of my grandchildren from my will and inheritance under my executor. They get from, I did not know the precise legal language necessary to the out person from the inheritance, but my inheritance here is to be complete and prohibited then from my children and my grandchildren from getting anything from me if they contest this will and lose. And it is my desire that they pay all of their attorney fees and court fees. I have 2 ex-wives who will not name, since I do get virtually everything in the divorce. So they won't get anything, since they get nothing from here. I specifically exclude my tiny parish in plain, like, and say I specifically use in plain English. I like me. I give devised transfer of my law behind the Webster, and whatever shall take 90% of my estate to my friends. Lang, to my friend Leslie Lang, as a thanks of my dedicated and friendship and service to me during the past few years. Her full name is Letty Dolores Taylor Lang, and her address is 1488 Monroe's Road, Bronx Hill, Mississippi. I have devised the 5% of my estate to my brother, Ansel Hubbard, if he is still alive. I have not heard from him for many years. If he is found alive, he will receive 5% of my estate. I extend the witnesses to whom I shall give my estate and oversee 5%. Jake Brigance. I devise this estate to the Irish Road Christian Church. I direct my executor to fall to sell my house, my property, and my personal properties and lumber yard near Palmyra for market value. And I have soon practiced my place for sale into my estate. Seth Hubbard, October 1st, 1988. This signature was small and met quite legible. Jake wiped his hands again and expanded his reading glasses, and Willis covered 2 pages in handwriting, and he will not mess with the handwriting and the paperwork. The will was written on. A dozen questions coming to attention. Who is Letty Taylor? Letty Taylor Lang. Who is she? And she is noted to be his servant, quote unquote, maid, nurse. She attended him as he was ill and took care of him. She is to get 90% of his estate. I'm taking off guard about that too.
That's a lot. Now, he only had who is this person that's getting 90% of his will to him?
She gets 90% of his will, and there's 10% each to the lawyer, Jake Brigance. He has 2 children. They get 5% each. His grandchildren get no money, and he gives the church 5% of his 5% of his estate.
That's not adding up. You said she get 90%. It's only 10%.
She gets 90%.
But it's only 10% left.
His children and his church.
Now, who is she to him?
Do what now?
Who is the lady to him that's getting the 90% of his estate?
Quote unquote maid.
Oh, his maid. Oh, yeah. And the name of this book, I have this book, but I haven't read it. Sycamore Row.
Sycamore Row. And
yeah, I had
you remember one person that we was talking to about Time to Kill? This is very much like a Time to Kill, and this is equal to a Time to Kill, but this is on Sycamore Row, and that's what this is called.
And Sycamore Row represents what? Is that a street?
No, it represents the Black community in the town of Canton. What town of quote unquote Canton, but it's called Clanton, but it's the town of Canton, and the Sycamore Road is in that Black neighborhood.
So the maid is Black?
Yeah, the maid is Black.
And what color is the person who died?
He's white. And that causes some confusion in that neighborhood. But yeah, but she's Black. And let me see. A dozen questions clamored for the attention. The most obvious being, who in the world is Letty Lang? Close second, who exactly is she to Seth? And how does she deserve 90%? Then, how big is the estate? That's what the question is. How big is the estate? No one can answer that estate. That can answer that question as of yet. If
so his name is Seth.
Seth, yeah.
Like S-E-T-H.
Right.
And what is her name?
Her name is Lettie Hubbard.
Lettie?
Lettie, Lettie, Hubbard. Hubbard.
I get you.
Okay.
And what year is this setting?
This year is setting in 1999. That's the setting of this year.
I guess.
As I said, a dozen or so questions. Who in the world is Lettie Lang? A close second is, what exactly did she do to deserve 90%? Then, how big is the estate? If it is indeed sizable, how much is to get up from the death? How much is they want to get from the death? That's the question about it. How much ever get to the death? The next question is, who is Jess Brigance to Seth Hubbard? All of these questions need answers, and none has been given. But before the greedy Jake took another walk around the office, he had the slammer into this address listed, and he went to the sheriff's office, Ozzy Walls, to let the sheriff read the will, see if he could make some sense out of what was written. And they kept the paper under a wrap, I guess, like you have it wrapped in like a book.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept it wrapped so nothing could get touched and nothing would get affected by it. So they looked it over. They looked it over and over and over, and no one could answer any of the questions that were asked. So Sheriff Walls, he copied the will himself, and he kept it in his file. The original will was taken to the Chancery Court and filed. Jake Brigance had.
Who gave the sheriff a copy of the will?
Huh?
Who gave the sheriff a copy of the will?
Jake Brigance. He's the lawyer that's the executor of this estate.
Oh, he gave it to the sheriff.
He gave it to the sheriff. So the sheriff could see and maybe answer some of these questions. Who is Lettie Lang and all like this? And he wanted the sheriff to see the will.
I see.
Timing would be of crucial at the day that the Chancery Court office would close.
Okay, you want me to read it while?
Yeah, you read it while. Yeah.
You was looking at where you was, huh? Well, you got you a juicy story over there. Lord. You have never reading by yourself. Okay, so a Sister Souljah is was a popular rapper in the 90s.
Okay.
And she's a novelist. She's written several best-selling novels. And I'm actually on page 144. And the name of it is Midnight. The teacher clapped her hands together and said, "All right, people, let's set it up." The students all got out of their chairs slowly and to their smocks. A comma lagged behind a bit. I guess she needed to follow what the other students were doing since she couldn't understand her teacher's English words. And I think she speaks Japanese. And she has befriended a boy from the Bronx who was actually born in Africa, but he speaks English. I guess she needed, okay, so glad that the attention was now off me. I turned to leave. I looked at Akima, who was standing in front of a cubie, putting on her smock. I pointed at the clock on the wall, signaled, and let her know I had to go. As I walked out, the girl model who had rushed in late, standing now on the table, usually casually pulled off her sweater and revealed her flesh, her neck and shoulders, her bare titties that went from white to pale pink to pink only to be topped off with purple nipples. What a creation shaped so exquisitely. My eyes then rolled down between her breasts and to her soft, flat stomach. It sank into her darkened belly button. Now he's about 14. The person that's narrating this, all I knew was I wasn't leaving no more. At first he was leaving, he decided to stay. She's in the art class. My legs weren't moving. Swiftly she untied her wraparound denim skirt. There were, wow, just a brush of sandy blonde hair. The teacher began instructing the model on how to pose properly. As the model tried to get herself into a position that pleased the teacher, she turned slowly, showing everyone her bare back and butt. She bent over, the crease in her hand widened some. Then she kneeled and eventually squatted. A slight, and she said, awakening my always precise sense of smell. Students, 8 males and 10 females, whose backs were all to me, faced their easels and the monitor. Nobody was saying nothing. They took her nudeness like for them it was an everyday thing. Now the teacher was back on my case. "You're welcome to stay," she said to me sarcastically, with a shy smile and her arms folded across her chest. The students turned toward my direction and began laughing once again. Akima, with her brush in her hand, just watched me closely with no judgment, simply observing my every move and maybe trying to read my thoughts. The intensity of her eyes unfroze my feet. Swiftly I left. In the cold breeze, I broke out in a hot sweat. This was the first time I ever saw a completely naked woman up close and in real life in all of her details. There was no doubt that I felt what I saw. I started thinking crazy thoughts like, how come a girl can have straight hair and nappy hair and red hair and blonde brush? And if this is how good a white girl looked naked with a small, soft-looking white behind, then what did the black females whose hips were wider fully look like? I kept seeing images of the gap when I looked at her Every time I thought about it, I would never see the model's face or even remember her eyes. I just kept seeing her body parts. Before the dojo, I dipped into the arcade. I played a few games of Street Fighter to try to get my mind back in the right position. Wow, Street Fighter was definitely an old game from the late 80s and early 90s. There was no way I would be able to concentrate otherwise. The whole scene back there reminded me of something Oma once said concerning why me and Nigel were not allowed to have a television in Brooklyn apartment. She said, no outsiders should control what my children see. Once you show a child certain things, you can never snatch that image back. I remember thinking that she was being too strict. Now I at least understood what she meant. Luckily, when I was 13, after the fast of Ramadan, she bought me a television as a present during the Eid. She said, there is nothing in this box that isn't happening right in front of you on these streets. You are becoming a man now. I have to believe that your father and I have raised you to separate yourself from evil. Niger, on the other hand, was still not allowed to watch. She was only 5 then. Your sandwich is in the bag, Amir said, handing me what I knew was my joint. I put it in my gym bag and loaded it in the locker diet joke. After our training, me, Chris, and Amir looked up. As we chilled in the back of the dojo, Sissy rolled up and asked me to step inside his office. Chris and Amir looked surprised. Sissy had never singled me out before. If one of us who were all expected to hear about it. It's your time now. I know you are ready, said calmly. He was standing behind his desk. His 7 swords hung one beneath the other, mounted on the wall behind him. His deadly hands and knuckles gripped the edge of the desk. I wasn't sure what he was getting at. I knew not to interrupt whatever it was he had to say. Your weapons training will begin next week. He continued, searching for my reaction. Okay, well, I'll stop and let you read. This is real interesting because he actually is a Muslim from Africa, and there was just really a big cultural difference between his upbringing as a Muslim in the Sudan in Africa and the lifestyle of the people he met in Brooklyn, New York. And the author really does a very good job of describing how different his training was compared to the culture there in Brooklyn, New York. But anyway, she's a very good writer.
So that,
go ahead.
So that was this set in New York, and the people involved came from Africa? Or was it set in Africa?
Well, it stars in Africa, and I still don't know what happened to his father. And then he and his mother and his baby sister moved to. They had land and everything in Africa. Then they moved to Brooklyn, New York, and started living in a high-rise apartment building. And so he's the narrator, and he's the main character, and he is taking karate classes with 2 of his friends, and he meets this Japanese girl, and they start going to a few places, but they have a barrier because she does not speak English. And one of her friends speaks English, and she kind of translates a little bit. But this particular day, they didn't have the translator, so he walked her to her art class. And that's where they were drawing a picture of a new person in the art class. Yeah. So you gonna read a little more of yours, and then maybe I'll read a little bit. Look at it's already 2:45. we read long, but it's taking up the time. With just two readers.
Let me get my reader so I can. Ozzie Wall's office was in the county jail, 2 blocks from the square, on a low slung concrete bunker, built at the cheap of a decade, or built at the cheap built on the cheap a decade earlier. A tourmaline-like bandage had been added to the house of the sheriff, and he still has deputies in his place. Was crammed and with cheap desks. Monday morning was usually hectic, as the weekend fun and games were tidied up. After wives arrived to bail their husbands out of jail, other wives stormed in to sign papers to get their husbands thrown in jail. Frightened parents waited for the details for the drug busts that often came unanswered. Deputies milled about the clocking down donut, yielding about the clock and down donuts, sipping strong coffee, added the usual frenzy and bizarre suicide of mysterious man. And the cluttered outer office was especially busy that Monday morning. In the rear, the appendage down down a short hallway, there was a thick door covered in a white hand-painted lettering that read, Ozzie Wall's High Sheriff, Ford County. The door was closed, and the sheriff was in early Monday. The sheriff was in early on Monday, and on the phone, the caller was an emotional woman from Memphis whose child had been caught driving a pickup truck that was hauling some other things, sizable quantities of marijuana. This had happened in the previous Saturday night near Lake Coachella in the area of the state park. Its illicit behavior was known to be common. The child was innocent, of course, and the mother was eager to drive down to retrieve her son from the Ozzie jail. Not so fast, Ozzie cautioned. There was a knock on the door. He covered the receiver and said, yes. The door opened a few inches as Jake Brigance stuck his head through the crack. Ozzie smiled immediately and waved him in. Jake closed the door behind himself and seized into the chair. Ozzie was explaining that even though the kid was 17, he was even caught with 3 pounds of pot. Thus, he would not be released on bond until the judge said so, as his mother railed. Ozzie frowned, moved the receiver a few inches from his ear, stuck his head in and smiled. Ozzy listened some more. The chattering about an ending of the finale got around football as Mississippi State, as we now,
Yeah.
as we now
World
are the
champions.
champions. We are the champions. It's down to football. Ozzy had played briefly for the Rams before blowing out a knee, and she followed the team religiously. Jake was a Saint fan, like the majority of the Mississippians. There were two talks about it. He aimed at All-American. He had 2 trophies as an All-American from Alcorn State in the mid-70s. And evidence had been meticulously about preserving his memory. On another day, another time, specifically with more of an audience, say around the courtroom, the recess had been other than lawyers, and listening to Ozzy might be tempted to tell the story of the night he broke his leg, of the night that he broke Jake. Jake had been skinny sophomore in the Razorback, as he had been skinny sophomore and the quarterback as he played in a Caraway High School, such smaller school that had been for children of some, kept the tradition going. It was Monday though, and the phones were ringing off the hook. Both men were busy, and it was obvious Jake was there for a reason. I think I've been hired by Mr. Seth Hubbard, he said. Ozzy narrowed his eyes and studied his friend. His hiring days are over. They got him down from the Margawells on the lap, from the Margellis on the slab. Did you cut him down? Let's just say we lowered him down to the ground. Ozzy reached for a file, opened it, and took out 3 8x10 photos. He slid them down on his desk. Jake picked them up, front and back side, all the same image of Seth and the dead hanging in the rain. Jake was shocked, and the second he then showed it, he studied the grotesque face and tried to place him. He had never met the man, he mumbled. Who found him? Jake asked. One of his workers, looked like Mr. Hubbard planned it all. Oh yes. Jake reached into the coat pocket, pulled out the copy that had slid over to Ozzy. This arrived this morning's mail. Hot off the press. The first page on the letter says, the second and third pages purported to be last in the will and testament. Ozzy lifted the letter and read the slow, showing no expression. He read the will. When he finished it, he dropped it on the desk, rubbed his hands, the eyes. Wow, he managed to say. What is this thing? Is this thing legal, Jake? On the face, yes. But I'm sure the family will attack it. Attack it how? Order to make all sorts of claims. The old guy was out of his mind of his woman exerted undue influence over him. and convinced him that the change of his will, believe me, if money at stake, they will unload both barrels. This woman, Ozzy repeated, then smiled, began to slowly shake his head. Do you know her? Oh, yeah. Black or white? Black. Jake suspected this and was not at all surprised, not disappointed. Rather, at that moment, he began to feel utterly rumble in his excitement. A white man and leave his money to a last minute will, leaving it to a black woman he was obviously quite fond of. A bitter will dispute played out before the jury, and the Jake was in the middle of it all. He then proffered her. How well do you know her, Jake? Jake asked. It was well known that Ozzy was known was a very black person in the Ford County. Those registered to vote and those who will lag to vote, who had known him. These are also on welfare, and those who own land, and those who were on work and saved money, as opposed to those in the church or Uncle Tom's. I know her, he said, careful as always. She lives out from Box Hill in the area called Little Delta. Jake nodded. I've driven through it. In the Boondocks, all were black, and she's married to a man named Simon Lang, pretty much of a deadbeat, who comes and goes off the wagon. He has never met any of the Langs. Do you want to meet this one? When he's sober, I think he drives a truck and runs a bulldozer. Before he's offshore once or twice. Unstable. 4 or 5 children. One in prison, I think. That is a girl named girl in the army. Lady about 45, I guess. She's Taylor, and there were about many of them around. He's a Lang, and the woods are full of Langs. Unfortunately, I do not know. I was working for Seth Hubbard. Do you know Hubbard? No? Somewhat. He gave me $25,000 under the table, cash for both of my campaigns, and wanted nothing in return. In fact, he almost avoided me in my first 4 years. I saw him last summer when I was up to re-election, and he gave me another envelope.
Now, is it so? The black lady was a politician?
No, this was Sergeant. No. The politician was the Ford County sergeant, and Seth Hubbard had given him campaign money, under the table, so to speak. Now, the black lady, she was a servant of Seth Hubbard, and the sheriff knew her from that county, from that Bronx Hill, that black section of the county. So he was asking, he knew her, and she was talking about her husband, who's a deadbeat, and worked this job, that job, the other job, worked offshore, drove trucks, and when he wasn't drinking. said he was drinking. He was on the wagon most of the time, but when he wasn't drinking, he rode offshore and all like that. Now, what it was saying is too, Albert, that they said that there's a whole slew of Langs in the county, but nobody knows any of
Okay.
them. But that was where I leave that right there, because that's where he got
I guess next month you have to keep reading so I can find out what happened, because you got a lot to read, and look, this is how much I get now. You got more than that before you find out why it is that he actually gave her so much of his will.
This is true. This is true. That's why we got to keep reading this, so I can figure out. Because, like I said, you got a small amount, but I got a bigger. I got a lot more to read.
Yeah, how big is that? How many pages in that book?
This is 622 pages.
This is 589 pages, but this is a pocket-sized book. You got a 6x9 trade, so this is still less reading.
Oh, let me
it's
say.
It's a pocket book.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, don't be cheating, Vickie. You're in the back cheating, trying to see what's going on back there. But I'm gonna read a little bit of
it. Trying to see what's all going on.
Yeah, you have to keep on reading.
I got to keep on reading.
But I'm gonna read a couple of paragraphs of this before we stop. Let's see where I was. I said,
I can continue reading now.
Okay, go ahead.
The drive from central Memphis to Ford County was only 4 hours. Let me get my readers on. Let me go back. We go back and finish. They sat in silence for a moment. See, I done got you beat. I got my 2 cups already. Let me go back here. That's Jake chuckled and said, "Oh, I think it's beautiful. You gotta go to the funeral? Only if you go. You're on." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the voices outside and the ringing on the phones. And they both know they had things to do, but there were so many questions, so many dramas just around the corner. I wonder whose boys saw Jake, Seth and his brother. Ozzy shook his head and closed. Had no clue. He glanced on his will and said, "Ansel Hubbard, I can try and find him if you want to run him, if you want to run his name through the network. See if he got any record or anything. Do that, thanks." After that heavy pause, Ozzy said, "Jake, I have a heavy lot on my plate this morning." Jake jumped up on his feet and said, "Me too. Thanks. I'll call you later." The drive from central Memphis to Ford County was only for an hour. What? From central Memphis to Ford County was only an hour. But for Herschel Hubbard, was always a lonesome journey that he seemed to kill a day. It was unwelcome excursion to his past. For many reasons, he made it only when necessary, which wasn't very often. He left his home at 18, kicking the dirt off his shoes and vowed to avoid the place whenever possible. He had been an innocent casualty in a war between his parents, and when they finally split, he decided with his mother and fled the county and fled his father of 28 years. And he flipped. When he finally split, he said with his mother and fled the county and his father. 28 years later, he found it difficult to believe in the old man was finally dead. There had been efforts to reconcile, usually on Herschel's behalf, and Seth, to his credit, hung out for a while, but tried to tolerate his son and grandkids. But his second wife had a bad marriage and had intervened and complicated the matters. For the past decade, Seth had been carried for nothing for his work. He called most birthdays around, sent Christmas cards once every 5 years, but then wasn't extended his effort and that was extent of his effort toward fatherhood. The more work, the more he looked down his son's career and was a major cause of their tension. Herschel owned the college bar. Herschel owned a college bar near the campus of Memphis State. And bars ago, it was popular and busy. He paid his bills, he had some cash. Like father, like son. He was still grasping with his aftershocks of his own nasty divorce. Once won decidedly by his ex, who got 2 kids and virtually all of the money for the 4 years. Herschel had been forced to live with his mother in an old delancing house in central Memphis, along with a bunch of cats and occasional freeloaders, bubs, his neighborhood took in. She too had been scared by an unpleasant life, had been scarred by an unpleasant life with Seth, and was pretty say that and was, as they say, out of her pocket. He closed the Ford County line, and his mood grew even darker. He was driving a sports car, little Datsun. He's brought a secondhand. Is that you scratching your neck?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're the only other person I know of. My brother scratches his neck, scratches his throat. And you're the only other person I know of that scratches their throat. He crossed the Ford County line, and his mood grew even darker. He thought the second hand primarily because his late father hated Japanese cars, hated all things Japanese. Really, Seth had lost a cousin in World War II at the hands of his Japanese captors. He realized that he wasted and begun his well-earned bigotry. He realized that's where he gained his well-earned bigotry. Herschel found a country station in Clanton and shook his head at the DJ's twang. His sophomoric comments. He said that he had entered another world. Once he entered the world long ago, he hoped to forget over and over. He pitied himself, pitied all of those funds who still lived in Boyd County and would never leave. 2/3 of his senior class at Canton High are still in the area, working in factories, driving trucks, and cutting pulpwood. His 10-year reunion was also saddened by skipping the 20-year reunion. After the first divorce, Herschel's mother fled the place and resettled in Memphis. After the second, Herschel's stepmother fled the place and settled in Jackson. Seth hung on to the farm, the home, along with the land around it. For this reason, Herschel was forced to revisit at the nightmares of his childhood. When he went to see Seth sometimes, he had done so only once a year until the cancer arrived. The house was this one-story ranch-style red brick structure set back from the county road and heavily saddened with thick oak trees and limbs. There was this long open front lawn where Herschel fled and played. Herschel had played as a child, but never with his father. They had never tossed a baseball, nor a football, nor even set up the kids' soccer goal, nor played played football and the kids' soccer goal. Once played tackle football as he turned into the long driveway. He looked at the wide lawn and was once again surprised at how small it had seemed. He parked behind another car. Once he did not recognize it, he was with Boyd County license plate and for a moment stared at the house. He had always assumed that he would not be bothered by his father's death, nor had he or any male friends had warned him of otherwise. You grow into the adulthood, you train control of your emotions. You don't hang with your father because he is not hugging people. You don't hug with your father, he's not hugging people. Hugging tight. No, you can easily survive without it. A little sadness, the funeral may have tear to, but within days the ordeal was over and you're gone back to your life, undamaged. And those male friends he had kind of things to say about their fathers. They had watched the old guy, age and face the death with little concern for the aftermath, and said every one of them had been blindsided by grief. Herschel felt nothing. No sense of loss and sadness of the closing of the chapter. No pity for the man who troubled he took his own life. He was set in his car, looked at the house, and admitted to himself that he felt nothing for his father. Perhaps there was a trace of relief. He was gone, and his death meant one last complaint. His death gone, and his death meant one last complicating factor. Hell's life. He walked in the front door, was opening. He approached Letty Lang, who was standing in the doorway, touching her eyes with her tissue. "Hello, Mr. Hubbard." She had a voice, strained, emotional. "Hello, Letty," he said, stopping by to rub the doormat, lying on the concrete. On the porch. Had he known her better, he might have stepped forward for a quick hug or some gesture of his shared sympathy, but he couldn't force himself to do so. He had met her only for 3 or 4 times and had never properly She was a housekeeper and a Black one, and as such was expected to stay in the shadows when the family was around. "I'm so sorry," she said, backing away. "So am I," Herschel said. He followed her inside through the kitchen, where she had pointed to a cup of coffee. "I'll make this," pointed to the coffee pot, and she said, "I just made this." "Is that your car right there?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Why did you park in the driveway?" "I thought you were supposed to park in the rear." "To the side. Next to Dad's pickup." "I'm sorry. I just wasn't thinking. I'll go and move it." "No, forget it. Pour some coffee. 2 sugars, please." "Yes, sir." "Where's Dad's car?" "The Cadillac." Letty carefully poured the coffee into a cup. "The sheriff took it and supposed to bring it back today." "Why did they take the car?" "You'll have to ask them." Herschel pulled the chair from under the table, sat down, and cradled his coffee cup. He took a sip, frowned, and said, How did you find out about that? How did you find out about Dad?" Letty leaned against the counter and folded her arms across the chest. He quickly scanned from head to toe. She was wearing the same white cotton dress she wore, knee length, a bit tight around her waist, where she carried the few pounds, where she walked across her apple, where she wore the knee length bit tight around the dress, tight around the waist, where she cradled a few pounds and very tight around her ample chest. She did not miss to look over at the Miss Hep, at 47 years of age, and looked after 5 children from white men. She said, Calvin called me last night and told me what had happened, asked me to open up the house morning and wait for you all. Do you have a key? No, sir. Ain't never had a key. The house was unlocked. White men who work here on the property said Mr. Seth called him yesterday morning and told him to meet him down at the bridge at 2:00. Sure enough, there were 3. There he was, stopping at the narrative long enough to dab her eyes with the tissue. Hershey took another sip. The sheriff said Dad left a note and some instructions. I ain't seen nothing like that, but Calvin saw it. Said Mr. Seth wrote he was taking his own life, and he began crying. Taking his own life, and she began crying. Herschel listened for a while, and when she was quite asked, How long have you worked here, Letty? She shook her head, took a deep breath, and wiped her cheeks. I don't know how long. It's 3 years. I started 2 days a week, cleaning up Mondays and Wednesdays, a few hours a day. Then I didn't take much because Mr. Seth lived alone. You know, he was pretty neat. And for a man, then he asked me to cook for him, and I was happy to do so. For hours, I'd cook, bunch stuff, and leave it on the stove in the fridge. Then when he got sick, he asked me to come over every morning and take care of him. When the chemo was real bad, he stayed in bed much of the day. At night, I found him. I thought he was praying, and I thought he was paying in a nurse. Letty knew how little Mr. Heft, Mr. Herschel, and Mr. Foe had seen their father during his illness. Letty knew everything they saw and everything they did. They knew nothing, ever. She would be respectful, as always. Yes, sir. He did for a while. Then he got where he did not like them. And they were always changing nurses and you didn't know them, but you might show up and did not know who showed up. So you've been working here full time for For how long? About a year. How much did Dad pay you? $5 an hour. 5? That seems kind of high. That seems kind of high for domestic help, doesn't it? I mean, well, I live here. I live in Memphis, a big city, and my mother pays her housekeeper $4.50 for an hour. Letty just folded her arms behind. Letty just nodded because she had no response. She could have added that Mr. Self had paid her in cash, but often nodded a little extra and had loaned her $5,000 when her son was in trouble and went to prison. The loan had been forgiven only 4 days earlier. There was nothing in writing. Herschel sipped on the coffee and disapproved. Letty stared at the floor. Once on the driveway, two doors slammed. Once in the driveway, 2 doors slammed. Ramona Herbert Defoe was sitting before she cleared the front door, and members of her older brother Ramona Hubbard was crying before she cleared the front door. She embraced her older brother on the porch, and he, to his credit, managed to seem to be sufficiently moved, and eyes tightly closed, lips poached, forehead frowned, furry, a man in real misery. Ramona wailed, what seemed to be authentic pain, though Herschel has his doubts. Ramona moved on and was soon hugging Lettuce, as if the two were the naturally born children, the nature-born children of the same kind and loving father. Herschel, meanwhile, was still on the porch, and the greetings, Ramon's husband, a man who loathed, and the loathing was mutual. Ian Defoe was a preppy from family of bankers down in Jackson, the capital of the largest city, home at least half of the assholes in Mississippi. The banks were long enough, belly up, but Ian would forever cling to the air of privilege. Boy, and even though he had married Laura, even though he was now hustling to make a buck like everyone else. As they shook hands politely, Herschel glanced at the shoulder on the cheek and checked out the vehicle. Sunny seeming new white Mercedes sedan, the last in his line of the same. Thanks to Ramona's drinking and loose tongue, Herschel knew that the dear Ian leased his car for 36 months and turned him in early. The payment caused a bind of their finances. And that took even a matter. And that was a far more important for Mr. and Mrs. Defoe to be even seen around North Jackson in a proper vehicle. They even eventually gathered in the den and found seats. Letty served them coffee and colas, and then carefully sipped into the shadows, into the open door of the bedroom, just down the hall, a spot she occupied when listening to Mr. South on the phone in his den. From there, she could hear everything. Ramona cried more than went on about how unbelievable everything was going. I finished that. I finished that paragraph, so I'll leave it right there. We can pick it up later. How much
Okay,
time?
yeah, it's 3:30 now, so we're in. So anyway, how close did we get to finding out? In other words, one thing we know is that she took care of him when he was sick.
We are very far from finding all that out. Because, this is Mississippi, so they got to find out how come this black woman got all this money from this white man. But we
I know, but I'm saying, you just read that she was taking care of him. That's one thing. She was taking care of him when he got cancer.
Oh.
Didn't you just read that?
So what now?
Didn't you just read that she was taking care of him when he had cancer?
Yeah, that was what he was telling. That's when he was telling his children what she was telling for him that she had worked for him for a maid, and then when he got cancer, she took care of him. And that is the basic reason.
Yeah, I guess so.
Why she got all that money.
Yeah. But anyway, so we're in now, and I enjoyed your John Grisham.
I'll pick it up. I'm gonna stay with Grisham. All
right, well, you have a good day here, and I'll talk to you later.
All right, then. All right.
Bye-bye.